お前たちは俺たちの仲間を殺した。その仲間を一人で地獄に行かせるのはかわいそうだろう。そのための儀式さ。やめろ！近づくな！俺に近づくな！
Welcome to another episode of the 31 Nights of Halloween Horror! You are not advertiser friendly! Episode number 13, which just happens to be on Friday the 13th. Yes, Friday the 13th, the special night that all horror is recognized, at least back in the day, man, when I was young and a teenager. Man, Friday the 13th meant Friday the 13th movies on television. It also meant horror movies on television in general. Just like Halloween, it was like another special day for us horror files. And unfortunately, it seems that we've lost that. Yes, now it's maybe we get a new movie that comes out, but for the most part, Friday the 13th is just a thought. It is no longer the fanfare that used to be, and I feel that we are at a loss because of that. But fear not, because I will review a Friday the 13th movie just for this special occasion. And since I've already reviewed the first one and the reboot and my favorite, Part 4, the final chapter, which ironically more movies actually came after the final chapter than before the final chapter. I guess we would consider that the Final Fantasy syndrome of the horror movie industry. Anyways, so what did I think? I would review the least favorite Friday the 13th. But however, I think that what a lot of people bemoan, and whatever made-up word that I came up before I said bemoan, a lot of people have horribly bad opinions about this movie, but I think this movie is probably the most underrated of the Friday the 13th franchise, and I love it. It has a special place in my heart, and that movie is the controversial Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning. Yes. Now, before I get into the review, I do have to tell you all that I do have personal bias toward this movie. You see, this movie would be shown on USA Network. It felt like every other Friday or every other Saturday. And it is probably the first Friday the 13th movie I've watched in its entirety, even though it was cut up for the cable viewing audience. Still, before that, I've probably only seen bits and pieces of movies. And so, honestly, this was my first real Friday the 13th experience, and perhaps that sort of lessened the blow of the plot twist. Then I can see that people who grew up with the first four movies and are big fans may have been upset, shocked, dismayed by what they were trying to do with this movie, but I didn't have that. So that may also weigh in my decisions on why I like this movie. But this movie, during a time where I was starting to get into horror. Beforehand, I was very afraid of horror movies. I would be afraid. I was a scared kid. Literally, I was scared of the dark. I lived next door to a cemetery. My sister, on the Night of the Living Dead, I was like, oh my God, these things are gonna come kill me. Fucking Child's Play, the Chucky doll freaked me out. I mean, like, I remember we go to the video rental store, and we had to go through past the horror section to get to the checkout, and I just would be traumatized by all those graphic, scary VHS boxes. And now I've learned to have a great appreciation for that box art and for the wonderful, scary posters that were during that time period, and lament that we really don't seem to have that as much nowadays. The lost art of the great horror poster and the great horror DVD, VHS cassette artwork seems to have gone away, and I feel sad about it. But this was like one of the biggest influential movies that got me to where I am loving horror. And you know what? I cannot fault this movie. It just holds a special place in my heart. So I am sorry. I said I'm sorry, but I'm not going to apologize. I love this movie. And all of you who says it's garbage can... No, I mean, you have your opinion. You have your right to it. It's just, you know what? This movie is definitely cool in my book. So let's talk about this movie already. Damn it. Okay. So Friday the 13th, Part 5, Our New Beginning starts with Tommy Jarvis witnessing two loser grave robbers digging up Jason Voorhees' body. But when they open up the casket, he's not dead, and he quickly dispatches them, and then he comes up to Tommy Jarvis and he's about to kill him. But wait, Tommy Jarvis is not a kid anymore. He's actually a teenager, and he wakes up from that nightmare, and we get the setting of the stage. Tommy Jarvis is a teenager now. His mind was all fucked up. I mean, he was terrorized by a hockey mask wearing psycho killer, kills a whole bunch of people around him. He's got to defend his family and ends up killing that guy, Jason. And of course, he starts getting shipped around from mental hospital to mental hospital. Finally ends up at this halfway house, but he is haunted by Jason. He sees him everywhere, in his dreams, in waking life, and he just can't seem to get away. And because of that, he is very protective, and if he is pushed, he will react violently. And dude, in this movie, Tommy he kicks ass. He has got some fucking kung fu shit going on, man. But anyways, so at this halfway house, another teenager is brutally murdered by another of the halfway house residents. And this event is like the linchpin that starts a series of events. All of a sudden, people start getting killed, and the police are baffled. And all of a sudden, rumors are abound that perhaps Jason Voorhees has returned from the dead and is once again stalking the citizens of this quiet town, murdering them one by one. Now, of course, this all seems to just happen right when Tommy Jarvis shows up into town, so we might think, like, perhaps is Tommy Jarvis the one? Finally breaks with the madness that was consuming him and decides to be the monster that he's been fighting all this time? Or is something else happening? Perhaps it is Jason back from the dead to wreak his vengeance. So, anyways, let's get to the scores. Violence and gore, I'm giving this a 4 out of 5. Yes, it is true that a lot of the violence is not explicitly shown. It is not like super graphic. I think some of that has to do with the MPAA's meddling. It was like in this period of time, the MPAA was really starting to crack down on horror movies, especially when it came with the graphic deaths. However, there is a high body count in this movie. According to this, it's actually tied for the most deaths in a Friday the 13th movie, tied with Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. And it is, it starts out violent and killing and honestly doesn't really slow down. There is just death after death. I mean, you don't have to wait too long before someone's getting murked in this movie, which is very good. And it has some great pacing. So anyways, the copious amounts, and plus the fact that some of the deaths you're using your imagination on, and they are kind of brutal. The whole like gardening shears, and then it just shows them go. I mean, that just, when it does that, you're like, ugh. And then the guy gets his head strapped to the tree and he's like twisting it around and it just shows the strap breaking. You can just imagine the pain. I mean, we get like a good decapitation. We have this great scene where we think like, oh, we heard a noise over there, so, the big baddie's over there, and then all of a sudden he turns around and right through the fucking window, just meat cleaver into the face. I mean, there are some really, really neat kills in this movie, and there are a lot of them. So it's got great variety. So a 4 out of 5. Shock value, I am giving it a 3 out of 5. There are a lot of jump scares, and yes, there are false jump scares in this movie, and I know some people dislike that. But anything that makes you go, oh, and gets your adrenaline, it might be cheap, but it's damn fucking effective, man. So I like it. So 3 out of 5 plus that twist. When I first watched it, I was like, wow, because I didn't know what. I knew about Friday the 13th. I knew what was supposedly going on, and the twist was, I thought, pretty effective and scary. So anyways, 3 out of 5 shock value. Plot, I am giving it a 3 out of 5. This is a thing that that people have a problem with. This plot is actually surprisingly layered for a Friday the 13th film, and I like what they're trying to do with it. I understand where they're trying to go with it. A lot of people have this idea that Jason has always been this sort of supernatural force. After all, I mean, he was a kid who supposedly drowned in the first movie, and somehow he survived. And then, all this time he was living in the woods, and the only reason he starts killing is because he sees something happen in the first movie, and it's time for his revenge. And yet, in each movie, he just gets brutally beaten and cut and slashed, and yet he still keeps coming back and coming back. So yes, you get this idea that Jason might be this supernatural force of nature that just, is the original Terminator. He can't be reasoned with, he can't be bought, and he's not going to stop until you're dead. And, of course, anyone who was going back, starting with 6, 7, 8, where he truly was the supernatural, unkillable machine. I can see why people would get that impression, but this movie doesn't assume that. This movie does something I think is risky, and a lot of times people bitch and moan about movies not taking risks, movies not trying to do something new, and I think this movie really tried to do something new and take a risk, and I appreciate it. And yes, there are a lot of plot conveniences in this movie. Yes, the narrative itself is pretty loose. I mean, they just have people show up randomly just so that we can get a higher body count, which I can appreciate, but yes, it's definitely more filler in the story than the actual story itself. And there isn't, outside of Tommy Jarvis, there isn't a lot of development or depth in the movie. However, the way the movie ends, watching it, and I've watched this a billion times, you see them put all the wonderful clues. Some of them subtle, some of them not so subtle. In fact, there's like a scene where it's like, okay, they're really trying to hit you in the head saying, hey, this is what's going to happen. This is how it's going to be. But in the end, I still think pretty strong. So I'm giving it a 3 out of 5. Acting, 2 out of 5. Look, the hick hillbilly people, my goodness, that is ridiculously bad acting. The guy who supposedly stutters, stutters sometimes, but then seems to not have any problem at all, which I guess is, accurate for realism, I guess. But when you're in like the movie world, you're used to people who stutter in a movie world. And I'm not saying anything negative about stutterers. Don't get me wrong, but usually in movies, stutterers are constantly stuttering. And that plot point is kind of used to kind of create that inability to talk during a frightful moment, which they totally don't use. Anyways, just the acting all around. I mean, Tommy Jarvis's character, I liked how he emoted. He didn't use a lot of dialogue because he only gets like 23 lines in this entire film. Anyways, but it's just, some of it is just really, really bad and cheesy, but still endearing. 2 out of 5. Nudity, I'm torn. Because I really do want to give this a 4 out of 5. Because there is some quality going on, and I want to give a lot of credit for the wet t-shirt. Well, it's not really a wet t-shirt, but wet white shirt during the end, showing off a lot of nip action. However, I'm giving it a 3.5 out of 5. I mean, look, we get a short scene in front of a mirror, and then we get a prolonged scene with a very beautiful, very lovely bodied lady. And then, some perky Titans toward the end. It was, quite a lot of screen time, in my opinion. I just, is the wet t-shirt enough to give it the 4? I don't know. But I'm giving it a 3.5 out of 5 for Nudity. Very nice. Very nice. And definitely contrast. Like, this movie is meant to be contrast with Part 6 in a lot of ways. And Part 6, to my knowledge, has no nudity, so boo-hoo. And it's one of the reasons why I think Part 6 is overrated. But anyways, this is not a discussion about Part 6. I might have to do that later, I don't know. Leave a comment if you want me to do Part 6, I'll do it. Anyways, so 3.5 out of 5. Enjoyment factor, 4 out of 5. Like I said, I love this movie. When I watch this movie, I know everything that's going to happen. I know it. I practically know it all by heart in a way, but I just love it. I can watch it over and over again, and I enjoy it all the time, and I just love the kills. I wish there was, a sort of, anti-MPAA version where they really dig into, like, dig in to the murders, but in the end, still really cool. 4 out of 5, and my overall impression is 3.5 out of 5. Look, it definitely bangs on all the horror cliches, but they're cliches for a reason, because they work. This movie has great atmosphere. It has a surprisingly deep plot in comparison to other horror movies, and especially other Friday the 13th movies. It dares to do something different. It has a twist. The twist actually makes sense, and the end was trying to set up something, because I think they wanted this to be a series that was not a supernatural slasher series, but just, psycho killer series. And they wanted to keep the hockey mask and wanted something to take up the mantle of Jason Voorhees. And, in the end, a lot of people didn't like it. In the end, they thought that was going too far, and they had to basically retcon this by making Part 6. And unfortunately, I don't know how it would have gone. In an alternate universe, I guess we would have found out. But in the end, the movie is definitely better than a lot of people give it credit for. This is definitely an underrated entry in Friday the 13th lore and horror movies in general. High body count, lots of tits, lots of cursing and cussing, and a lot of great fun. There's some dark humor in this movie. Some of it is tongue-in-cheek. And a lot of people complain that, the first, a bunch of Friday the 13th movies tried to be way too serious, and, that was like, one of the things that they rag on them is like, this series is ridiculous and it should embrace its ridiculousness, which led to Part 6, which I think went too far in embracing the ridiculousness. And then Jason X basically just went overboard on the ridiculousness. But I think it's a great movie all around, and definitely underrated. So overall impression, 3.5 out of 5, which averages out to a solidly cool 3.3 out of 5 average. So Friday the 13th, Part 5, A New Beginning. Somewhat spoiler-free review. Anyways, if you agree with me or disagree with me, have you seen Friday the 13th, Part 5, A New Beginning? Leave a comment in the comment field below. Give me a thumbs up, thumbs down. You totally disagree, tell me I'm full of shit, whatever. I don't care, just do it. And subscribe. And as always, everyone, you guys, you stay sexy and you stay scary, internet, and I will see you next time on the 31 Nights of Halloween Horror. And remember, I'm honestly just like, I'm sorry. But remember, people, just because something isn't what you think it is, doesn't necessarily mean it's not as deadly and frightening and scary. Because guess what? When you let your guard down, the last moment when you least expect it, that's when you get that cleaver through the window to your face. My God, that was an awesome scene. Fuck you people who hate this movie. I mean, like, I'm just saying that, I'm just saying that, you know, figuratively. But, I mean, like, come on. I love it. Blah!